help women, save lives, and peacefully end abortion where you live.
I can tell you exactly what would happen. The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired.
You were serious about that?
Be inspired to change hearts and minds by joining over 1 million volunteers taking part in the global movement happening in your neighborhood.
She says, pray that I can get through this abortion. And I said, oh, no. So she went ahead and went into the abortion clinic. And she just came out. She told us, I'm not going to get the abortion. We just had a baby saved. So we had a baby saved in Memphis today. Praise the Lord.
This is the 40 Days for Life podcast with your host, Sean Carney.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today on the 40 Days for Life podcast. I am Sean Carney, the president and CEO of 40 Days for Life, and your host for this now video podcast for 40 Days for Life, audio and video. Thank you to all of you who have been listening. We started this podcast. Steve, when did we start this?
Back at the beginning of 2016.
Wow. And a lot has changed in our country. We will get to that during this new year version of the 40
For better
days.
and for worse.
For better, for worse. It is 2023. It's got to get better, hopefully. So we did the audio podcast. It just exploded. I want to thank everybody. I mean, particularly Steve, the last 3 or 4 years, we've just seen the numbers grow. We got a lot of requests to do video podcasts. Our YouTube channel has been growing. And it's been awesome. So this has been kind of a big reveal. We've been very excited to launch a video podcast. And for those of you who didn't ask for the video podcast and have no interest in seeing us, and maybe you're starting this new year off a little angry that now you have to see us, you don't actually have to see us. You can still listen to just the audio version on your podcast app or wherever podcasts are available. So I thought that was very... inclusive of us, Steve.
We're all about inclusivity here.
Inclusivity is the new word. Happy New Year to all of you. Merry Christmas to all of you. We hope you're having a beautiful, wonderful Christmas season. You had a great Christmas, a great New Year. There's a lot going on in the pro-life movement. But we are going to cover a beautiful topic today as everybody starts to make their pro-life resolutions, Steve, and we're gonna do a separate pro-life resolutions podcast. But today we're gonna talk about holiness and sanctity and the ultimate thing that we can do as pro-lifers. But before we get to that, there's a couple of things going on. Number one, this is a sort of awkward time of the year because for many people, and it hurts my heart to say this, Michael Buble just disappears off the face of the planet once Christmas is over.
That is accurate. He's actually disappeared in my house at Christmas too. But
Okay, I should start. So I love Michael Buble, and everything. His music is awesome, right? And then he has the Christmas album, which I guess, those royalty checks every quarter. It just must be unbelievable.
Big time.
Yeah. But there's this notion, a lot of people only know Michael Buble from his Christmas album. So he just disappears off the face of the planet. I think there's always he's trending on Twitter, going into Christmas. It's like, where's Michael Buble been? Now he's back. It's Christmas. And then he sort of goes away in the new year. So do you not like Michael Buble?
I don't dislike him by any means. I just have never really gotten into him.
Why not?
I don't know. I should have a funny answer to this
we
question.
Didn't actually plan. We didn't plan this banter, but I'll say this. Okay, that answer, which sounds like you're running for Congress. I don't dislike it.
Yes.
I would never have one myself. I don't know. I've never met anybody, and we know some very angry people who hates Michael Buble.
Really? On what grounds?
I've never met anybody.
I thought you said you have met people.
No, I've never met anybody.
Okay.
I don't think that they exist. Maybe you do in your 40 Days for Life podcast listener, which is very discouraging, actually. Email us if you hate Michael Buble, podcast at 40daysforlife.com, because I love Michael Buble. This is an appropriate time to talk about Michael Buble because he has a great song I'm feeling good. And he says, it's a new dawn and it's a new day. And I'm feeling good.
Well, I'm glad to be here starting this year off in Texas, because to me, January 2nd is sort of just 3 months of snow and bleakness and salty residue on my car.
January 2nd, which I know many people are watching or listening to this podcast after the fact, January 2nd is my favorite day of the year.
That I believe to be true.
It is the wonderful and great birthday of Mary Lisa Carney the Great. It is also our wedding anniversary.
You never, if that's raising the stakes, because if you forget one, you forget both.
I can't tell you how many people I meet and they're like, oh, that's so cool. You're the dumbest man I've ever met in my entire life. Because it helps now that I'm 40, because I've learned what to do and what not to do. It's like learning what to say and what not to say when discussing abortion. But I had a couple of hiccups in my 20s. I'll reveal this now that we're video. We have to be, I guess, more transparent. Mary Lisa, I guess we were married maybe 2 or 3 years. I got married when I was 21. So I was like, whatever, 23. Did we have a child? I don't even know if we had because we had a Bridget when I was 23. And Mary Lisa said she had some trip coming. I don't know where she was going, like a family wedding or something. And she said, I want luggage. So I was like, great. You know, she told me a few months. She said it out loud, and I like typically write notes or something like, I need to remember this, because I got Christmas and I got the birthday and then I got the anniversary. This whole time period. It's just, I usually just like buy a ton of things like in November and have it shipped to my mother-in-law's and then just sort out what I'm going to give her on whatever occasion for whatever one of her 3 days. So I'm walking through a store and I see khaki luggage like 70% off, right?
Boom.
We're newlywed, we're broke. I'm like, done. So I buy and I'm excited. I don't do what I would have done now as older, a little bit more mature Sean, which is like text a photo of it to my mother-in-law, because they have very similar tastes. They have great tastes. So I would have done that now, but I was an idiot, more of an idiot, I guess, back then. So I didn't do that, and I'm pumped. I'm like, oh, baby. She wanted luggage. She's getting luggage. And she opens it, and she's like, oh, it's dude luggage. It's like nerd guy who travels once a year luggage. And I don't realize that because I don't think about that at all. So I give her the luggage. She's like, oh, and she acts like she likes it, but she doesn't, right? Like the Seinfeld thing. Tube sucks. Oh, yeah. You got me luggage. If you say the gift, you don't like it. We obviously have tied that into why they have to scream that abortion is healthcare, because it's not. It's the same thing. I knew she didn't like it. And then maybe 6 months later, she kind of confessed. She's like, I was thinking like something with flowers on it, or, pink or red or something.
Yeah. And I think you one time told me this story, and then you described yourself as the Peyton Manning of gift giving. Sometimes you come through brilliant. Sometimes you get wiped out in the first round of the playoffs unexpectedly. I thought that was a great analogy, and one we have to share in the podcast, because we share all football analogies.
And how great would it be to say that I'm like the Tom Brady and all I do is win Super Bowls, but that's not the case.
I made the mistake, Sean, one time. I don't know why I decided my family needed to know this story, but I was telling this story to my family, and my in-laws were there, and then a few days later was Christmas, and I got luggage from my in-laws for Christmas. So it was usually Laura my wife can put a good spin on anything, and she's like, yeah, that was kind of bad.
That is bad, and it's. So anyways, I've hit some home runs. I'm not going to talk about the home runs, because then I'm just like bragging on myself and shaming the other guys that don't buy as good as gifts as I do for their brides. And I don't want to do that. I want to do it. I'm not going to do it. But there have been some home runs. But I do love January 2nd. It's awesome and a great day. A great day to release our video podcast. So obviously the requirement for Steve was not, maybe you're depressed about this. Maybe if I said, hey, we're starting a video podcast, you are moving your whole family to Texas, you'd have been like, in-laws, mom and dad, you just go and say, I have to, I can't do anything. Sean yelled at me, but I didn't do that. And I'm not forcing you to like live in like our closet. So this is my setup, right? Like a little corner of my office. Do you hear any kids right now?
I do not.
I don't either. We planned this well. I think they're napping. And if you hear kids and you don't like that or that bothers you, you can complain, but it's going to be very difficult for us to fix it. So when you
the wrong podcast for you too.
Exactly.
The pro-life podcast. And I don't want any of the kids in the background.
I don't want the kids in the background. But you'll go back home. You'll be in Wisconsin. We'll have our guests on the video podcast. So it's going to be great. We're going to get into a lot of topics. We'll be able to do a lot with the video podcast. Thank you for those of you who encouraged us to go video. And we've had a lot of help from behind the scenes doing this. And we're releasing, obviously, this one and a number of video podcasts in our initial part of our hit the ground running theme that we've had in a post-Roe America as we get into 2023. And so it's very, very important. And if you are starting this new year and you want some pro-life resolutions, like I mentioned, we have a video on that, video podcast on that. So be sure to check that out. And one last little plug. Speaking of New Year's or pro-life New Year's resolutions, if you notice, Steve, I am starting the video podcast by sporting the Rudy's Barbecue tribute to the veterans camo cup on the table.
That is great. You could pair that with your 40 Days for Life camo hoodie. I mean, it's a good look.
I can't tell you how bad I wanted to wear that hoodie on this episode, but it was just going to be too much camo. And
nobody would see you at all.
Nobody would
just
see
blend
me.
right in.
Just be like hiding from the abortion industry. But yeah, I wanted to do that, and shout out to Rudy's Barbecue, which is still tasty and still free in this post-Roe world. So, all right. So Steve, we've done about 1 million podcasts on what to say, what not to say. This is not, by the way, a shameless plug for our Amazon best-selling #1 new release Amazon book.
Not at all, even if you can get it at 40daysforlife.com or at amazon.com.
Or Amazon.
It's not a plug for you
wanna
to go to either of those websites.
You want to support the mission more. 40
Yeah.
Days for Life makes a lot more money if you buy it on our website, and you get a signed copy. But the last thing we're going to do is start this year off by plugging our book.
We're above that.
However, we have done a lot of podcasts on what to say, what not to say. We see forced birth. We see the elections. I don't want to remind people of that. It was a while back. Seems like a really long time ago. But disappointing, once again, for a lot of pro-life Americans. Can't rely on D.C. It's up to us. No one's coming. No one's coming. One of the things, and I know we talked about this, and I'll bring it up again, but you and I, you especially, because you're very gifted in the political realm, and you're more of a, I'll have an opinion and then I'll kind of like run it past you and say, is that accurate with the polls? And you're telling me yes or no. But Steve's kind of a political nerd. It's one of the huge advantage we have having you in the pro-life movement. But I think for decades it's been disappointment after disappointment on a national level for elections.
For sure, no doubt.
I mean, is Donald Trump, is his little arrow with the 3 Supreme Court justices, isn't that an island? I mean, he's not the rule. He's his time period is the exception.
Yeah, without a doubt. Before that, we kept using that analogy of Charlie Brown trying to kick the football, and it keeps getting pulled away. And I think that's what we saw again in November. But this is where, as discouraging as that sounds, I think we need to take heart and take confidence out of the fact that we've had victory after victory after victory the last decade or 2 decades in spite of Washington, D.C. We can't take it for granted. There are places in the world, there are perhaps people listening to this podcast who live in countries that haven't seen that. They haven't seen abortion continue to be controversial. You can go to parts of Europe, parts of our Western Christian heritage where abortion isn't controversial anymore. But here in the U.S. and in many other countries, it is controversial. Again, not because of what's going on at the political level. It only even remains a political issue because of people like those who listen to this podcast who go out and pray in front of their local abortion facility and really serve as the conscience of their community and the conscience of our country.
Yeah, and I mean, we had a post-Roe plan. It worked. We had the largest 40 Days for Life campaign ever. We gained cities despite losing many cities for the best reason, which is abortion facilities closing, and the campaign goes away. And you know, we had the post-Roe symposium. We're having the next post-Roe symposium in Orlando, Florida, in July. You know, we expect close to 1,000 people at that. You know, we had the largest campaign ever, but politically, that always seems to happen. And I know for us at 40 Days for Life and for our friends who run pregnancy resource centers, we obviously, you know, we're not 501c4s, we're not political groups, so we're kind of detached from the political part in our mission. We obviously want people to vote pro-life, but we can criticize it a little bit more because we know we're winning in the grassroots. I mean, the pregnancy centers are outnumbering abortion providers 5-1. We don't have the luxury of throwing in the towel if our guy or our lady doesn't win. And so anyways, all of that is in the context of, we said we weren't going to bring up the election, of heading into a new year. And I think regrouping in a lot of ways for pro-lifers that are feeling down. You should not feel down. You should feel down if you're putting all your hope in politicians. I mean, definitely, but that's just no way to live.
1 year ago, every pro-lifer on the planet, you can trade in the election for Roe being overturned. You take that deal every time. This is still a victory. We are still where we want to be. Planned Parenthood is still where it doesn't want to be.
Yeah.
Abortion is still against the law here in Texas and in a number of other states. So we got to have big picture thinking here. We suffered a setback, but this is always going to be messy. You don't come out of a civil rights injustice that's lasted for decades and find some happily ever after. There are bumps in the road. We've hit them. We're ready for them. We're going to overcome them. And none of these bumps is a bigger obstacle than what we encountered 50 years ago this month when Roe v. Wade established abortion on demand for any reason, all 9 months of pregnancy. You're right. We're in a good place.
It's also the result of Roe being overturned when you have the most pro-abortion government in history. And some people double down on that. We've talked about that a lot. But, you know, that's God's sense of humor. Donald Trump gives us these 3 justices after all these sort of loser nominations and loser decisions, Roberts, of states like Texas not being able to regulate abortion. And then, you know, Trump comes in, gives us the triplets, and they overturn Roe. But that only creates new challenges, and that's what we've seen. That's why we shouldn't despair. These are good problems. These are good problems. When they're storming around saying more women are motivated to vote on abortion, and we saw a little bit of that. We saw a lot of it. They're more motivated because we're winning, and they're losing, and they've been fat and happy for a number of decades. So there's a lot of good going on, but there is no greater injustice. That's one of the frustrating things I have with every political cycle, and it's just living in this time period of history. Is a lot of people, abortion is one of many issues, and it is the barbaric slaughter of an innocent baby, and done on a scale that Earth has never seen, with over 90% of the government supporting it and funding it. We've never had a genocide or Holocaust like that, and that evil requires us to have a different disposition. That's why we encourage prayer and fasting, and we have the Lent campaign coming up in about 6 weeks. I know I'm speaking at the West Coast Walk for Life in a couple of weeks, where you get up in the morning and you move on to end abortion no matter what's going on in the country. And in order to do that, we have to be living the gospel of life, and we have to be living a culture of life. And that's what we're going to cover today, is to just give you, we have covered what to say when, rape, incest, my body, my choice, no uterus, no opinion. One of our favorites from the listeners and the readers, forced birth, how we wish we had made it up. and put it in a book, but it is all too real. But I think you or somebody pointed out a review of What to Say When. And somebody said the last chapter is worth it. And I've been interviewed on a number of Christian outlets. The secular media never asked me about this. But the last chapter is the point, which is we won't do like a spoiler alert. You do have to still buy the book. But that we're called to be saints. And I want to read from one of the opening. Yes, we have to read from this. This has happened before, and somebody's like, "You didn't memorize your own book?" No, it's
Just the first 2/3 of it.
just the first 2/3 of it. But this is actually hard to get because the sources in Harvard are so crazy. But Mother Teresa spoke at Harvard. This is how I opened the last chapter of What to Say When. So Mother Teresa did 2 commencement addresses. St. Thomas Aquinas College out in California,
Sure.
which we've heard of, but probably nobody else has, and Harvard. So little super conservative Catholic college, and then Harvard, whatever, fill in the blank. So it's 1982, and they actually told her, "Hey, America's this wealthy nation. We're poor. Calcutta's poor. Come and talk about America's moral obligation to support other countries," which America does, and she delivered that message better than probably anyone else in the world ever could have. And but she pivoted, Steve. She pivoted, and we put that in the opening lines of the last chapter. She said, "It is something unbelievable that today a mother herself murders her own child, afraid of having to feed one more child, afraid to educate one more child. A nation, people, family that allows that accepts that, they are the poorest of the poor." So she went on to say that it is a poverty that a child must die so you may live as you wish, which of course became a very famous bumper sticker in the pro-life movement. Not what they expected. But Harvard's journal covered this, and it said, "Mother Teresa spoke with an almost mesmerizing conviction. What she said struck many listeners in the Harvard yard that day, but she received a long-standing ovation from the unusually large crowd that had come to hear a saintly woman."
You know truth, beauty, and goodness when you see it.
I mean, I really want to say in 2023 that she would be well received now.
Sure.
I mean, 1982 was crazy. This wasn't the good old days. But so even then and now, judgmental, get your religion off my body, rosaries off my ovaries. I mean, all of that. But she didn't get that canceled. But you can't cancel a saint. And that's why, we need to strive to be saints, not just so we don't get canceled, but because Jesus Christ is attractive. And that's why she was given the longest standing ovation in the history of Harvard commencement addresses, 10 solid minutes. That's how she ended. I could go on, but she said, America needs to repent for abortion, the sin of abortion. And when America repents of the sin of abortion, she will get back to her foundation and end abortion, and the world will follow.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. What she said is true. And to me, it's moving that people who, as you said, 1982 was not some sort of Pollyanna. It's not like we're looking back to the golden era where everybody was pro-life and had family values. We're coming out of the 70s, still coming out of the 60s in a sense. And yet they heard her message and they just knew. They didn't have to think about it. They didn't have to grapple with it. It just pierced their hearts, and they were open to receiving that. And I think that's ultimately why we see so many lives saved at 40 Days for Life vigils. Certainly we've got to make the talking points that we do, and we've got to answer the questions, and all of that is in this book. But when you're there and it's hot or it's windy, or it's cold, or it's snowing, or it's icy. And we got a great 40 Days for Life leader in Lansing, Michigan. And I was talking with one of his volunteers, just saying, he's out there just hour after hour on his knees on the concrete praying. A woman going for an abortion, that touches her heart. The guy driving by, who maybe would flip him off ordinarily, touches his heart. What is it that leads these people to be out here and do what they do? Nothing less than the love of Christ. That's why sometimes people are like, oh, we won't let 40 Days for Life into our church. We won't let 40 Days for Life into this or that, or I'm not going to participate because we can't have politics. Nobody can look at someone on their knees on the concrete in snowy Michigan and say that this is political, because politics doesn't motivate people to that level of sacrifice. Nothing other than Jesus Christ motivates someone to do that. And that's why we see all these saved lives, the workers leaving, the abortion facilities closing, the women who had an abortion 10, 20, 30, 50 years ago or more coming back and finding healing finally because Jesus Christ is out on that sidewalk.
Yeah, I wish Chuck and Carrie would have put it in Unplanned the Movie, but we had a Franciscan nun. She was a full-habited nun who would go out and kneel and pray the rosary on her knees on the sidewalk and weep in 105-degree August heat. And, we knew her as Sister Bernadette. It was just, our friend, and she was wonderful. And I got to tell you, I underestimated the impact that had on the workers. I never really thought about that. I could see certainly the impact it had on women going in.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until Abby left, literally, I think her second day after she resigned, and we were keeping her a secret and, don't tell anybody. And, we're trying to get her a job. And she looked at me and she said, "Who is that nun?"
Oh.
And I said, "Oh, Sister Bernadette." And she said, "I have to meet her. I just have to give her a hug." She said, "I can't tell you the impact she had on me, but all the workers, including her boss," if you remember from the movie, her boss was a tough lady. She's even tougher and meaner in real life. This is a family podcast. But pray for her. She was very bitter and very angry. Abby said she would go and close the blinds when she would see Sister Bernadette out there praying.
That's all you can do. It's your only option.
It's the appropriate response other than conversion.
Yeah.
But Abby said one time she stormed out of her office and said, "Is that nun still out there?" And
it's a prophetic witness. It is truly prophetic. And sometimes we look at prophetic as meaning like you can tell the future or something. It's someone who sees reality for what it is and has the courage to tell the truth about it. That's what it is.
It really is. And it was funny because Abby said, "I want to meet her." And Sister Bernadette, she was being transferred the next day. But
The sister?
Yeah.
Okay.
4 days after Abby was converting.
Her mission there was done.
I never even thought of that. She didn't know Abby converted. Nobody knew. So Abby really wanted to meet her. And I wanted to set that up for Abby. But also I didn't, we had a few board members that didn't know she came over at that point. I mean, This was like days into it. So anyways, I reach out to Sister and she runs by the office and we took this little photo. And I always thought they would put it in the movie, but they never did. There were too many, I guess, feel-good things. Even Haywood got cut out of Unplanned. But there were too many feel-good things in the movie. But it really speaks to, that's why we open that final chapter up with Mother Teresa, because the opening chapter is go on offense, which is true. And we do need to go on offense. And it doesn't mean in the new year or at any time of this of 2023 that we're just so nice to people. We're going to sit down and have a conversation about, the details of infanticide and your beliefs and my beliefs. We have to cut out the nonsense and ask questions and do all the things that we talk about in the book and go on offense. But if we're not doing it with a disposition of holiness, serving God, and preparing to answer on Judgment Day for what we say to a person. I mean, what is it? 80% of women said they never would have had an abortion if somebody just would have said something.
Reached out a helping hand and offered to support them.
That's a scary thing of being culpable of not saying something.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's why we just get the results. I mean, this is where sometimes I think people who are perhaps politics are important, but people who are overly political minded, I've been told before, you probably have too, prayer is great, but we need to be out getting folks elected. We need to be at the Capitol. We need to be doing all these things. Sure, yeah, we do. But the bottom line is prayer is the engine that fuels all of it. If we're going to have legislation that's more rooted in the law of Jesus Christ, it's got to begin with prayer. We're not going to just find an alternate route there.
Correct. And I just don't think the other things last. And we've seen politicians, great ones, bad ones, come and go. We've seen Supreme Court justices come and go. We've seen Roe come and go. But there's no way to keep going in this without prayer, without an interior life, and without living your life and taking care of your families and loving your children, loving your parents, taking care of your parents, getting your kid to football practice on time, shoveling the snow for you, mowing the grass for me. We're going to have to start mowing here. February means we got to start mowing again.
I don't want to hear it.
I know. I know you're in the middle of the Steve Carlin, the annual winter Steve
Not
Carlin.
the middle, the very beginning of it.
Depression. Yeah, you started getting depressed in August because it started getting down to like 65 at night. But doing all of these little things and truly doing it for God. Look, I got, you worked for 40 Days for Life. I got blasted one time in an op-ed, which was actually kind of funny. And the author, the only way I found out about it is because I was brushing my teeth at like 6:30 in the morning. And I got it was like a Facebook message.
Okay.
Did they still do Messenger? Is that still a thing?
It's still a thing.
Is it its own app?
Yes.
Okay. I think at one point it wasn't its own app.
Correct.
Okay, this was them. Because now I don't have the app because I don't respond to Facebook messages. It's on my list of a life of peace.
Good blend.
How to live a life of peace.
The way Facebook's going these days, maybe nobody will be responding
I
to
guess
Facebook messages
so.
soon.
But this author blasts me, and she said, sorry, or not sorry, but it was almost like an apology. Don't take it personally. I would love for you to respond. Here's the article that I wrote and mentioned you. Anyways, and I had said in an interview, actually like this, I was on a video podcast way back in the day, and I said that, of course, the pro-life movement has many groups of people because this is the most common sense thing. You can be homosexual, you can be an atheist, you can be an agnostic. I mean, an 8-year-old has the intellectual capacity to be pro-life. It's not some profound heroic position, actually. It's very basic and common sense. Like
sometimes it's education that educates us out of the common sense position.
Yeah, I want everybody to drink more water. I mean, that really doesn't take a lot of courage unless half the people in your country think that water restricts their rights to health care. So scientifically, it's not a very sophisticated position. So I said all that we have like a sort of a big tent, even though I hate that term because it's such a common sense position, but that ultimately the pro-life movement is like other civil rights movements, is religious.
Yeah.
It was the moral outrage that finally took over the abolitionists. It certainly was pastors for the civil rights movement. And Martin Luther King himself being a pastor, and that the pro-life movement, just whether you want it to be or not, is very religious. It started with mainly Catholics in the 70s, and then the evangelicals came on board in the 80s and 90s. Now you have this non-denominational, wave of them being more pro-life, mainline Protestants. So it's just if you took somebody to the March for Life and you told them it's not religious at all, and you took them, they'd be like, I don't know, it seems like a pretty religious movement. If you went to a pregnancy center dinner, if you went to a 40 Days for Life campaign, the majority of it is religious. So this lady was offended by it because she was an atheist, and she said, I didn't want atheists in the movement. And she wrote this like criticism of me. She didn't really have big followings. I mean, I didn't respond or give credibility to this. This is like 10 years ago. But I remember thinking that, which is our point today, you can be an atheist and be pro-life. You should be. Well, no matter what you are, you should be pro-life, or against abortion. I don't know how you reconcile our desire to kill a baby. I don't know how the agnostic or the atheist explains away that which is broken in us. It's not that we have abortion. It's not that doctors do abortions, or that we build abortion clinics, or that we have stupid politicians who say, "Oh, I'll fund your abortion," or "Oh, it's between you and your doctor." It's not only that. It's that we want abortion.
Yeah, that's so true, and it's just the incontrovertible proof that original sin exists. Sometimes I've said before, God is subtle at times. Sometimes he'll hit you upside the head with a 2x4, but sometimes he's subtle. He is content for us to search for him, to seek him just as he seeks us, and that isn't always very overt, so to speak. The devil doesn't do that. The devil is in your face all the time. We've seen it more than ever. I've sometimes compared the last year where we saw Dobbs come out and overturn Roe v. Wade, just the rage that we saw. To me, nobody gets that angry about education policy. Nobody gets that angry about the federal budget or about some sort of stimulus package, whatever legislation we have. You only ever see the rage, the pure unhinged rage when it comes to abortion. I think that's proof that there's an element of spiritual warfare out there, because if we were just a bunch of random atoms and molecules colliding into each other, I can agree, disagree, whatever. It's like any other issue. But because this is a war for eternal souls, I think that's where you see the intense anger come from. It's the exact opposite of that radiant love of Mother Teresa that you described at the beginning of the podcast.
Yeah, and my point on this is to have the fortitude to win this and to end abortion, we need God.
Well, we've seen what happens if you don't, right? Even in 40 Days for Life, there are people who have come out to 40 Days for Life vigils, at my local vigil, at other local vigils, and they're in it because it's pro-life, or maybe they're conservative, or maybe they are out there for political reasons. I don't know. I don't know why they come out there, but if you're anchored in prayer, you can do it year after year. And that's why we've had people for 15 straight years leading or participating in 40 Days for Life campaigns. But if you're not anchored in prayer, anchored in God, anchored in the Word, one of two things happens. Either you burn out and you just go away, or you become angry pro-life guy. And we've all seen him.
Guy. We've talked about angry pro-life guy. We have never had him on the podcast.
That'd be an interesting episode.
I'm going to go on ahead and say he's not welcome on the podcast because angry pro-life guy is completely unreasonable.
Right.
Like, we can have people that don't make sense or a little unreasonable, but we can't. Angry pro-life guy. I couldn't even have the Rudy's Veteran Tribute, barbecue cup.
No, they're not really defending America if they're not defending all Americans.
Yeah. It would
the paper in this book was...
Everything gets ruined, even Rudy's,
It's the Christian version of woke.
It is, absolutely. It is absolutely the Christian version of woke and cancel culture and all of that. But that's why, one of the other things when you were mentioning that hit me is we now have our little mini studios at our houses, and then we have a beautiful studio where we do our big stuff at the HQ, and we have T-shirts, and we do a symposium every year, and we have cool 40 Days for Life jackets and all that stuff. I think one of the attractive things of 40 Days for Life, and we've had 1 million volunteers, but there's a small fraction of people you're like, well, why do they go out? It's that it's organized. I mean, it's a compliment to 40 Days for Life, but it's organized. You can trust it. There's a system. You sign a statement of peace. There's a local leader. There's a T-shirt. There's a water cooler. And then you're like, I'm not praying and I'm not going to last. And you quit. Mm-hmm. Like, it's more than the cool T-shirt.
That's where we had the one time where you and Matt Britton visited Madison, and there were the angry socialists who were just talking about the angry abortion supporters, and they're into a rage, and it looks like that scene in a great classic movie, Ghostbusters, where all the demons are flooding into New York City. It looked like that.
It was like Ghostbusters.
And we're walking down the street to the event, and we have to go past them because they're basically blocking everything off, and they're screaming at us, and that we're racists, and we're sexist, and we're bigots. And then one of them leans to the other and was like, but they got cool jacket.
Yeah. Was he like the 40s? He's like, cool jacket, bro. Yeah, it was funny. I had a similar event like that, and this is the human side of it, not the saintly side of it. But they get so wound up that abortion facility, thank God, that is closed, the Ephesus of Dobbs, the one in Jackson, Mississippi. The last time I was out there, I got a hand. The pro aborts had a lot of people out. We had hundreds. I mean, the Mississippi folks are awesome, but they actually had a lot of people out. And I think you get that in Mississippi because you're like, pro-abortion guy in the midst of like backwood redneck Baptist,
I've got to say, if you're listening or watching the podcast and you've never been to like a deep South abortion facility, it's a whole different environment, a whole different culture from what you're going to experience in Wisconsin or Boston or California.
Yeah. I mean, the Californians are like, we just want abortion, bro. I mean, it's kind of like, are we friends? I can't tell. We've had some nuts in California, but overall, it's actually it's not like you get some of these places in the Deep South where they're so angry that they're living in the Deep South, and not everybody agrees with them. But I was standing next to the fence at this clinic in Jackson, and the pro-abortion workers and volunteers, there's like a guy in a beanie, he was standing there, and they were like, that's Sean Carney. And he looked at me and he said, you live in Houston. Get out of our state. Something like that.
Okay.
As if there's not, I mean, it's not like Boston or Canada. I don't know.
Right.
And I said, I do live in Houston, but I'm not a Texans fan. I like the Cowboys. And he's like, like at the time of like what was going on with the Cowboys, he was like, do you think they're going to re-sign Zeke? It was like, what? So I actually engaged in him because he was like so caught off guard. We're discussing the Cowboys running back now, and whether it was a good move or a bad move, and whether you like Jerry Jones or you hate Jerry Jones and all of that. And then I like went up and gave my talk, and I start in on the abortion facility, and he kind of goes back into character. But it was like this 5-minute segment of being a human being, and that's why we're gonna win. By the way, that abortion facility, post Roe, all they did leading up to the announcement of the overturning of Roe was, we are here to support the poor black women that need abortions in Mississippi. I mean, it was like, you really need to quit saying that. But they kept saying it. You can't get rid of your inner eugenicist. So they kept saying it. Healthcare for poor minority women in Mississippi. We're not leaving. Roe's overturned. I think it was the next Monday after the Dobbs, after the 24th of June. They announced their closing. They sell the building. They leave. They go to New Mexico.
They couldn't get that moving truck loaded quickly enough. And that's kind of interesting, too, because what have we heard for all of these years? Abortion is only 3% of what Planned Parenthood does. And yet, when they can't do abortion, they disappear, they close up shop, they cut back hours, they leave town. That's why it's so weird to see like every abortion facility in the South suddenly decide New Mexico is the place to relocate. That one did. Whole Woman's Health in Texas went to New Mexico. And then Carbondale, Illinois was another place where they're all converging upon these other locations. They've completely bailed. If this is comprehensive healthcare, okay, I guess you've lost one little segment of what you call healthcare. Now, adios, bro.
Yeah. And we're going to those places in the abortion RVs in the New Mexico, and they're overestimating the travel. I still believe that.
Because we haven't seen the reports of it. There haven't been the documentaries on, and here's the 20,000 women who cross state line. We know some of them are, but there's not that many. The women aren't dying. We don't have the...
The documentaries are, Sally lives in Texas, which of course is hell. So she had to fly to New York and have her abortion, and the plane was delayed. And we get those stories. We get the one person.
Because you have stories when you don't have data.
Right. But when we get the data and they say Sally did travel to California and have an abortion, and that's horrible. Fortunately, we have 40 Days for Life campaigns everywhere, so the travel on our end isn't, we're still there. So they're not like lost to us. We still have a shot of saving the baby and helping the mom. But once you have data that says, I don't know.
When Dr. Michael New comes out and says, yeah, I'm sure some of the Texas women went to New Mexico, but we also see that as soon as the Texas Heartbeat Act took effect, the birth rate in Texas went up. You can put two and two together. That's data.
It's 50,000 babies in that 1 year. 50,000 babies and Texans.
And who wants to be the one to come out and say that those babies being born is a bad thing?
Unfortunately, I think it is Planned Parenthood, and it is these politicians who are trying to be, on the wrong side of history at a level that we've never seen. But going back, the 3%, I've explained the 3% to people so many times. It's only 3% of what we do, which they don't do anymore. Now they say we do abortions, we do them loud and proud, and we do them through 40 weeks, and you're welcome. And by the way, write us a check because we need the tax dollars. You can explain the 3% away. I've done it a million times. It confuses people. But the best analogy, and somebody said, that makes complete sense. I understand now. I said, this is like McDonald's claiming that only 3% of what they do is selling and making French fries.
Yeah. Or your World Series champion Astros. They're not a baseball team. They sell hot dogs. They sell peanuts, Cracker Jacks. They've got a mascot. None of that's baseball.
We're talking about living a holy and saintly life and a pro-life life as we start off this new year. And I want to congratulate you. You are off to a great start because you mentioned the World Series Astros in all humility.
All humility.
It's not even baseball season.
I am a Milwaukee Brewers fan. My fandom is steeped in humility. There is nothing to be proud of.
Well, a shout out to the Brewers. Didn't they have a guy rush the field and get arrested? And he said, you can't arrest me because I identify as a brewer.
He was trans brewer.
Now, he is welcome on the podcast, unlike Angry Pro-Life Guy. Oh, my word. That's amazing. So some of the resolutions, and I know we covered this on our pro-life resolution podcast, but we mentioned how people get involved, how people flake out, how, of course, you can be an atheist to be pro-life. But I don't think that ultimately you can win because this is a spiritual battle, and you have to understand that we are fighting evil. And evil is not just something really bad that happens. Osama bin Laden is evil. Mm-hmm. Hitler is evil. The hurricane hitting New Orleans is evil. Losing your car keys is evil. Evil has a new dimension. Evil has an orchestrator and a conductor, the devil. And we have to know that we're in a battle. And that's why I think that increasing our prayer life, being more disciplined to follow the gospel, setting these New Year's resolutions. There's one of the things, these pro-life New Year's resolutions, one of the beautiful things I think that does come out of a disappointing election, and it's not like the last election was like the end of the world. Somehow we keep bringing it up, but we said we wouldn't. Is that it refocuses you. It's up to us. It's up to us. You're not making California abortion free through the law. Michigan, sprinting to infanticide. Illinois, all these states that want abortion through all 40 weeks, we've closed abortion facilities in all of them. We can't say it enough that of all the abortion facilities 40 Days for Life has closed, 45% of them are in blue pro-abortion states. That's how you can end abortion. And we just mentioned, joking about Mississippi, sometimes it's easier to do a 40 Days for Life in California than it is in Knoxville, Tennessee. And so, you have to have that Christian fortitude. You have to have that humility. And you have to know that you just can't explain it away. And that's the irony of writing a book like What to Say When. It's not to be a know-it-all, but you will be a know-it-all. You'll be able to tell off your pro-abortion uncle at Thanksgiving. but we're not a reasonable people anymore. Is it Chesterton that said we can no longer speak as if man is reasonable? That's why we have to live the gospel.
It's absolutely true. And the gospel in so many ways speaks for itself, because I look at friends, people in my life who are striving for the gospel. They're not perfect. They're sinners. They make mistakes. They screw up. But there's such a difference to me between what their lives look like and those who have consciously and actively decided to kick God out. You see, anything bad can happen to you in life. You could get cancer. You could lose your job. You could have financial difficulties. A hurricane could hit your house. All of those things can happen, but you can weather these things with the Lord. When you run away from God, you get a lot of ugliness, spiritual ugliness, physical ugliness. I don't think it's any coincidence that when we see those angry abortion supporters, that they've got like strange things that they've done to mutilate their own bodies. Their clothes are strange. Their faces are angry. It's not attractive, but the gospel is attractive. People will reject it, but it's not because they're not attracted to it. It's because they're afraid of what accepting that invitation from the Lord will mean, and the sacrifices that go into it. But it's a joyful life when you strive for Jesus Christ, and that is true whether life is easy or hard. It's a joyful life, and I think that is what people see and witness, and why they choose life, because they can perceive it intuitively, the same way that those students at Harvard saw what Mother Teresa had to offer.
Yeah, and what they saw was a saint. And one of the beautiful things, if you speak to high schoolers, it's any like private high school. You go in and you talk, and they've heard like all the chastity talks, and they've heard all the like, be a good person, be a saint. And I know occasionally I'll talk about sanctity and holiness and all of that. Saints aren't just like on a holy card or a statue somewhere. They're real. They're dirty. They're funny. They're like our Lord. They work hard. But the great thing about striving to be a saint is that you don't have to. You don't have to be a saint. I mean, this is America. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
So it's not. It is a rebellion. You don't have to be a saint. I'd rather have fun with the sinners than cry with the saints. A lot of people do.
Yeah.
I mean,
but they end up crying too.
They end up crying too, and they forget that there's no one more joyful than a saint. That's why Mother Teresa can stand up there and say that. That's why John Paul II could say what he said to Bill Clinton on a rainy airport tarmac, that every country will be judged on how they treat their most vulnerable citizens, especially those in the womb. And you have Bill and Hillary standing 3 feet from you. He could do it because he was joyful and he had peace. And I think that this realization that you can give up, you can give in, you can quit, you can stop repenting, you can stop saying you're sorry, you can live for self. You have the freedom to do that. All of us do. And that's the point, I think, when we start a new year, is that acknowledgement that we actually have a choice to make. And that is going to impact whether we end abortion. That is going to impact our families. That is going to impact the kind of country that we have, is our willingness to kill that which is in us that is preventing us from becoming a saint. Because we don't have to do it. We don't have to kill it. We can feed it. We can feed our own selfishness. We can feed all of our tendencies that are not of God. But if we fight, we have to acknowledge that it's hard. And it being hard, I think, is the ultimate challenge. There's nothing harder than following Jesus Christ. And, unfortunately, he doesn't ask for admirers, because then the world would be perfect. If we could just all check a box, I admire Jesus. Everybody admires him. He was a good philosopher. No, he wasn't. He was probably a nut or God. And so
yeah, one or the other.
It's a pretty tough thing. Augustine said it, C.S. Lewis said it. He is, he's lunatic, liar, or Lord.
But it's going to be hard either way, right? Like, I saw this thing one time where it was like, getting in shape is hard, but being out of shape is hard too. Which hard do you want? And I think that you look at those who support abortion, and they've largely, in many cases, won in worldly terms on everything. They had abortion on demand for any reason for 49 and a half years. They still have it in much of the country. They've won on marriage. They're winning on gender. They're winning on this, that, and the other thing. and they only get angrier. And you look at us, we'll go back to who we've quoted before, Tolkien. History is sort of the long defeat followed by the final victory. We're like Paul. We've been shipwrecked. We've been abandoned. We've suffered all of these things. Lost elections, lost court cases, lost legal battles, lost ballot initiatives, broken promises, broken hearts. And yet you go to a 40 Days for Life vigil. And I found when I'm going to vigils, I'm visiting a campaign and I'm going to go speak in front of the Planned Parenthood. Maybe sometimes I have to park 2 blocks away and I'm walking down the street and I can tell who else is walking to that Planned Parenthood vigil and who is going to the store, because you can sense the love. There's the discernment of spirits, and you just know.
Yeah, you just know. And it's not because of the 1,400 pro-life bumper stickers
Right.
in somebody's car, but you can spot that. And that's why, it is hard and it is worth it. And we're not called to be losers. We're called to participate in this great victory that our Lord gave us. And that ultimately is what we want to encourage you to do as we start this year. We ease into this. This is sort of an ease in podcast into the new year, into our new video podcast. But make a resolution. Listen to the podcast. Watch the podcast. Sign up for 40 Days for Life 365. Go to one of the marches later this month. Do something, because we're winning on this culture front, and we're not winning because we're just sitting by and saying that we're pro-life and we know what to say at Thanksgiving. That's not why we're winning. We're winning because we're praying, we're fasting, we're sweating, and we're struggling. St. Jose Maria says a saint is one who struggles against sin, and that is what we ought to do and in our daily lives. And I think that we'll see that play out. It'll give our world a lot of peace, the mini world around us, those we encounter every single day, but truly living a culture of life. And we have a lot of work to do. We'll have a lot of stuff coming out over the next couple of weeks. We have a webcast that we hope that you join us for. There's details of that on the page here. But also, as far as growing our YouTube presence, as we've been able to do really actually since COVID. That was one of the good things about COVID. I knew that COVID contributed something to the world.
Oh, it contributed something, all right.
So we weren't going to talk about the elections. We did that twice. We weren't going to talk about COVID, and we've already done that. So it's definitely time to wrap up. But subscribe to the YouTube channel and leave us comments also, and let us know what you like, what you didn't like, and email us. We have a lot. Every episode will be a video podcast. We'll have different guests. We're really looking forward to this. So you'll see us in different settings. Steve may have something in the Packers maybe in your future on the podcast. That could be
We'll wear a cheese head on the show.
controversial.
It's going to look amazing.
That's just like all this controversial stuff we say on YouTube. It doesn't get us banned. Late term abortion, all this. Steve wears a cheese head. We're canceled. That would be it. So, all right. Well, that's a wrap. Thank you. Be sure to share this with your friends. Get your friends to subscribe to the YouTube channel. And we will see you next time. God bless you.